Science connects the complexity of life. It guides public policy. It uncovers new opportunities. Science connects researchers on Virginia Tech's campus, builds powerful industry partnerships, and helps solve the challenges that face our lives today.
Hello everyone, this is Becky Freemall on Virginia Tech's campus with the Science Connects podcast. With me is Bianica Pires from Virginia Tech, a researcher in the Northern Virginia, Arlington area, and also with us, two guests today. Paula Robinson, she is with the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia. Welcome both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bianica, tell me first a little bit about your research. And I say here on Virginia Tech's campus. You are on Virginia Tech's campus, but normally you are up in Arlington, not here in Blacksburg. Talk a little bit about what you do.
That's right. So I'm a computational social scientist, and what that means is that I study social systems, and I try to take a complex systems approach. So I do a variety of different methodologies, from computer simulation, agent-based modeling, to statistical methods to try to study issues important in the social world, education being one of them.
And that is where Paula comes in. Again, Paula's with the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia. Paula, tell me a little bit about your work and your background.
Sure. I have the pleasure of serving as Assistant Director of College Access and PK-12 Outreach at SCHEV. In that role, I kind of serve as the bridge between K-12 and higher ed, so the Virginia Department of Education, K-12 system, and the higher education system in the state.
What is SCHEV? That is going to be my first question.
Everyone asks that.
Well, I'm glad I started with that.
SCHEV is the coordinating body for all of higher ed in the state, so that includes our 2-year and our 4-year colleges, our publics and our privates, and our for-profit and our nonprofits. And so we get to serve as their support, but also advise our legislature as well as the executive branch on issues relating to college access and higher ed.
All of the above.
All of the above.
You're busy.
Including non-college. Yes.
Very busy. And I understand that that two of you work together on a study of, I guess, essentially who goes to college in the state of Virginia, or I should say the Commonwealth. Quick question or two, with a long answer, I'm sure. Why did you guys want to study this, and what were you trying to accomplish by going forward? And I'll let either one of you take this one.
I'll start off.
Okay.
Really, we approached it from the reverse. We were really looking at who wasn't going.
Okay.
It was really important for us that we see the data shows that 72% of our students from K-12 do transition into higher ed. We were worried about the other 28. What happens to them? And who are they? And why aren't they going? And trying to look at the factors that might encourage that we could use to encourage them to go, to change that behavior, and working with Virginia Tech to kind of identify those factors that could change it for those students. So we go from 72 and to higher.
Bianica, question for you. Talk about deciding to tackle those questions that SCHEV was asking. What are the questions that you were getting for this research, and talk about tackling those questions? So
we kind of approached this study with the question, what factors influence post-secondary outcomes? So why are these students not going to college? What is influencing their decisions to go, and maybe where to go? A 4-year institution, 2-year college, certificate, credential, or no education post high school at all. And we thought we would tackle that with a smaller pilot study. So we wanted to start small because we wanted to assess in a relatively short period of time whether it even makes sense to scale this type of study across Virginia. So we conducted this pilot by selecting a few communities across Virginia. So in total, we looked at 21 high schools, and that's out of just over 300 public high schools across Virginia.
Talk a little bit, Paula, if you would. How did you know when you're like, okay, we want to answer this question? How did you even know to go to Virginia Tech and say, hey, they do this? I mean, sometimes I think I'm just amazed day after day how I uncover stones, and I work here on Virginia Tech's campus, about the things that are taking place in the research that's possible. How did you know it was possible?
Well, really, fortunately, the stone got thrown to me.
Perfect. That's wonderful.
our director is the one who really was contemplating this question about, what about those that don't go to college? And he had our interaction with someone at Tech, and I guess we heard of a lab. We were actually looking to do more research and understanding this population of students who weren't going on to college, and the opportunity just happened. So sometimes things just happen. I think the stone was just thrown in, and we were there to catch it at that time. And so it perfectly fell into my office for college access, so it was a nice fit.
Were you also concerned with disparities when it comes to education among students, opposed to who those people were and what the disparities were that they faced?
Absolutely. With access, that's one of our primary things, is looking at the gaps between achievement, specifically here, the gaps between post-secondary enrollment. And so in Virginia, in K-12, the gaps really occur for those students with ethnic minorities, as well as those that are disadvantaged in terms of income. And so right now, our average for the state for post-secondary enrollment for K-12 is 72%, as I mentioned. For our African-American students, it's 66%. And for our Hispanic, it's 65%. And for our low-income students, it's 59%. And so there's a huge gap.
Yeah.
That's they're part of that 28 that's not going. And so we're trying to understand what is that 28% and how can we encourage them to go.
Bianica, knowing that information, what kind of information and data did you gather? How did you take that first step to conquer this fairly large umbrella question, this theme?
Right. So one way to dwindle that down was, first of all, by just kind of looking at a subset of high school, a subset of communities. And we wanted to pick communities or areas within Virginia that had kind of interesting variations in terms of socioeconomic diversity, mix of urban and rural, and different levels of educational attainment. So we picked one area that in Virginia that's towards kind of the middle, southeast part of Virginia, so included Richmond City, Sussex County, and other areas. And then we went further west and included parts of Appalachia.
Okay. One thing I was going to ask, too, is I think it's important to talk about the data you did gather and what you did use, but I think sometimes just as important is the data that you choose to exclude.
Yeah, so part of this is that we used only publicly available data, and I say that because we did not, use data on individual students.
Okay.
So we know that in terms of educational outcomes, where students might decide to go to college or not go to college, they're influenced by contextual, institutional, as well as individual and household level factors. So all of these things, should be considered. But starting small, part of that was, we'll just focus on what are the contextual and institutional factors. So we looked at what are the characteristics of these high schools, what are the opportunities in terms of post-secondary education in these communities, and what did the communities look like generally speaking.
So to talk about that data, sophisticated analysis, and not to get too far into the weeds, because you might leave a few of us, possibly me, wondering what you're talking about. Keep it more at a surface level and tell us a little bit about how you dug into that and what you found out.
Yeah, so just to mention briefly a couple of the data sources we used, the main ones were the Virginia Department of Education and SHEV. So it turns out both of those agencies have a wealth of information online that's publicly available, and we were kind of blown away with how much community and school level data we could just gather from the web, from graduation rates at different high schools, the number of students enrolled in different programs like dual enrollment or career and technical courses, number of students on free or reduced lunch to get at the disadvantaged population, and admission rates to different colleges. And part of that also included what we called the outcome, the student outcome. So just how many students went on to what thing after school. So how many students from each high school went on to a 4-year institution, a 2-year college, some other continuing education, the military, etc. So that provided our outcome data. And then all these other variables from the Virginia Department of Education, SHEV, combined with data from the U.S. Census, College Board, and even online job ads, provided what we call our predictor variables. So without going into too much detail, we developed a predictive model that took those variables or data we collected about the high schools, the postsecondary institutions, the communities. And then we looked at the proportion of students at each high school that went on to one of these different outcomes. And we wanted to assess which of these predictor variables are most associated with each type of student outcome.
Paula, after hearing all of this, were you just absolutely amazed at how this all went down and the things that they can do?
I was, especially when we first talked to them. She was talking about they were using something that was similar to what was used in the Obama campaign to study how behaviors.
Yes, so we used a similar methodology, machine learning, classification and regression trees when I talked about the predictive model, it was the same similar type of methodology they had used during these campaigns.
Interesting.
There they were looking at trying to predict who's going to vote for who, but also of those that might vote for the other party, who would be most responsive to different interventions.
Gotcha.
Which matches our students that we're trying to, who may not otherwise consider themselves a college-going student. What intervention, what factor would turn them to someone who's going to be a college-going student? Yeah. So it was just similar to draw those connections between that work the work that they had studied and the work that we were trying to accomplish. So it was just an interesting opportunity for us.
I think when I hear about the capabilities that this lab has on Tech's campus, I think from someone from your perspective, and I won't put words in your mouth, but I'd be like, oh my gosh, what are my next questions? I want to ask them about this and this and this, because you have so much, you're just a plethora of information. Do you think that there'll be more after this? I mean, do you already have a list of questions? Because I have like 50.
Well, after one study, it's like, we need to do another study. It's always the next step, because it's just more, you do come up with more questions. And it's just interesting. And we were talking, and so I was like, well, can we look at this factor? And she was like, oh, yeah, we can add that, and we can add this to it, and we can add that, and we can go look at that census. I was like, and it just seemed like it was just more and more. Yeah. More and more. I think in the end, how many indicators were we looking at?
Just over 70 different variables. So, they characterize the high school and the community and all that. And we didn't even get to go down to the individual students. So, once we do that, we'll have more. Oh,
how funny. How, moving forward, what are some of the results of this pilot study that you found? And what are you hoping to do with it?
So
what did you find, and then I'll ask Paula what you hope to do with it.
Okay,
that
sounds
is
good.
That is a two-part question. So let me ask you, Bianica, what were some of your findings?
So by developing this predictive model, what we were trying to do at this pilot stage is assess what variables are most associated with each of the outcomes. And some of the things we thought were interesting was, so for students that go on to two-year college, the variables associated with that seem to focus more on things kind of outside of the high school itself, actually. So these were communities that had higher unemployment rates. The cost of college was lower in these communities, and the rates of admissions into four-year college was low. Whereas variables associated with lots of students going to four-year institution was more related to the high school and the student body. So these were high schools that had high enrollment of AP or advanced placement courses, high on-time graduation rates, low dropout rates. And then for students that were going straight to work or who had no plans after high school, the variables associated with that were high dropout rates and low on-time graduation rates. So I just thought it was interesting how the two-year college effect seemed to be around the community, whereas the four-year was more around kind of what the students are doing at the high school, what courses they're taking.
Well, that is interesting. How long did it take you to work thus far on this piece of research?
So we did this in a few months in total.
Wow.
It was probably getting the data ready was about 2.5 months.
Oh, yeah.
So preparing the data definitely took longer. Developing the models and then getting some interesting findings, I think, like we did, was about another month, I suppose. But that's why it was just 21 high schools. So that just helps.
Send me indication, 21 high schools.
We're in the thousands, no big deal, students. Paula, what do you do? I would assume you might even have more time now that will be needed to then implement and know what to do with all this data.
It's going to take us way more than 2.5 to 3 months to figure out what's next. What we've realized from this is just from the findings that Bianica just mentioned, there really is a need to establish somewhat of a post-secondary going culture across the state so that more students are aware of all the options, no matter whether they're living in a more rural community, knowing what and how to get there, if you want to be in that rural community, if you are in that rural community and you want to get to a 4-year, what are those steps? And maybe how can you use that 2-year that is in your community to get there? Just making more students aware of those options, and even those that are in a community where more students do go on to a 4-year, not everyone is meant to go to a 4-year. Right. And so that oftentimes becomes the culture, and then those students who that don't fit into that sometimes just kind of fall on the wayside. And we want to make sure that everyone's aware of all the options so that everyone sees their place. This all falls into our goal of becoming the best educated state by 2030. And so to do that, we can't leave anyone behind. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we've got 28% that are falling behind, and they are talented and talented and excited and enthusiastic, and we need to make sure we find them a place. Whether that's at our 2-year college, a 1-year program, an apprenticeship program, a 4-year college, I think this really shows that we're going to have to approach it differently to make sure that everyone's aware of their options and what the possibilities can be.
Will this kind of birth some programs through SHEV?
That's our hope. Not just SHEV. To tackle this is going to take more than just SHEV. We'll be partnering with others, with our institutions as well as with K-12. This is not something that we're going to be able to do on our own. And so my hope, I guess, down the road is that our work will be referenced or sourced for the beginnings of new programs, new policies, new legislation even, and new budget.
Right,
maybe allocations. We'll throw that out there. But yeah, I mean that is the hope that this work will help identify some of the strategies and interventions that really can make a difference for our students.
I'm going to ask you a question, Bianica, just about the lab. It's been around for a few years, social decision analytics. Talk about, kind of in a broader term, not just with this project, but when you say social decision analytics, what is that? What are some of the things? This is one piece of that big puzzle. Give people who are listening kind of an idea of what you can do, what can be done. I don't think they know that these things exist in the world. I didn't. I'm putting you on the spot. See, so for you already know this all happens. You're like, I don't even know what we do. Because you just do it every day. You're so in the weeds. But what are some other, I mean, if you, very shortly, without getting too far in the weeds, maybe some projects you've helped with education and what other aspects of people's everyday life? I think, what I'm really trying to get out to people is the fact that it doesn't just stay in the four walls of the lab. This really reaches far-reaching into our everyday lives, into these students' lives. And I don't think people realize that what's happening in the research taking place on Tech's campus has a true impact on what they do every day. So what are some maybe everyday life type things that you've done that have impacted people?
Quite a bit of work with the county, state government agencies. So, for example, we worked with the County of Fairfax to help broaden their alert system. So they want to make sure that more people have access to the alerts that come out that are important, whether it's a weather event or some other type of political event, to get the information out there. We've worked with Arlington County as well on some projects. We've talked to them about issues around housing. Okay, so finally, and listening to all this, and this is a question I really want to kind of hear from both of you. From Bianica, what is your hope when we talk about the research that you've done? And just 2.5, 3 months, it's going to have a lasting impact. Where do you hope to see this in 10 to 15 years from now? Yeah, so there's a few things I would love to see. First of all, I hope that this type of research, that we can develop it far enough that we're really helping students, identify the post-secondary path that's best suited for them. So as Paula mentioned, whether that's going to a 4-year institution, 2-year college, vocational school, or getting a certificate, what's the path that's right for them? And then also be able to help school administrators, counselors, teachers identify and target student interventions that will help guide students towards those kind of individualized paths. And finally, we want to be able to help the schools to target resources such that they're providing the mix of resources that best fits the paths for their students and I think their unique communities.
Perfect. And Paula, obviously, as a member of SHEV, what are some of the things that you can do? What are some of the policies that you hope to see or implementation of programs in the coming decade?
Well, I think from this specifically, I think the next step for us would be possibly to bring it to scale, because we did just a pilot, and so some of the findings that we found we need to do more of them to determine if there really is a correlation between the findings, the behavior, and the indicators. And so one, we're going to bring it to scale, and from that, really identify programming, as you said, that really would support those various interventions or the things that we find are helpful for students. Virginia has one of the greatest disparities by locality in terms of degree attainment. And actually the lowest attaining degree attaining community actually was one of the pilots, one of the lower ones. And then we go all the way up to those who are, 89% of adults in an area do go to college. And so how do we bridge that gap? So that a student who's born in an area where there are fewer family members going on to college can have the same level of achievement, same level of aspirations as a person who grows up in a community where everyone, the kind of the expectations that they go. And so I think we need to fill that gap with information and resources. So there's a baseline of information so that all students can, again, find their place. What those things are, I don't know yet.
Okay.
We're going to have to identify some through the study and more research. But we do know that there's a need for more information because we know that the talent is out there.
Right.
And for us to become the best educated state by 2030, it's both our civic and our moral obligation to make sure that we do it. And so I don't know the answer yet. Right. But more studies like this will help us get there.
It's going to be exciting to find out. I think it's an exciting time now that you know all this facts, all this information.
It's exciting. Our demography is changing. It's a lot of factors, and so it's kind of fun.
All right, well, thank you so much to both of you. Bianica Pires from Virginia Tech, a researcher in the Northern Virginia, Arlington area, and Paula Robinson. She is with the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia. Both of you, thank you so much for coming in. I am Becky Freemall with this edition of Science Connects.
Sharing knowledge accelerates discovery. To learn about other transdisciplinary collaborations, go to research.vt.edu.